succeeding the original Trump King type 25 years almost to the day that he first debuted in Medarot 3. It is the new stalwart wall, TKG01, King Landio. With a mostly new kit of a super first aid, reduce, countdown, biped legs, and the leg ability of Unshakable, which buffs the legs shoot and melee resist when in heating phase. Now, Gan King has most certainly been one that's kind of been on and off a lot of people's radars, mostly for the fact that countdown is very solid for a very shameless super invasion spam if you're at the end of your rope, and first aid is always a very solid life insurance option on just about any kind of platform or team that you put it on. But Gan King also had a number of very solid weaknesses that made using him kind of tricky, especially with his role as a defender and having perfect guard while in change mode. Well, King Landio, as successor 25 years to the day of the original Trump King type, basically takes everything that made Gan King fairly solid before and just makes it all the more aggressive, bulkier, and just all around safer and more practical to use. SF Aid, or most likely Super First Aid, is a souped-up version of the original First Aid attack skill that is currently in Medarot S, but to explain briefly, it is a setup-based skill that will place an active plant on the ally's side of the field. Now, much like First Aid, which procs upon an ally reaching the command line with broken parts, it will restore one broken part to operation at 10% use, which is what First Aid does. Super First Aid, on the other hand, will grant a 50% HP restoration to the part that it restores, but at the cost, the plant only has 3 charges instead of 5, which, being completely honest, I think is a more than fair trade-off, because having First Aid restore something at 10% HP is nice, as it does mean it guarantees you'll have it back sooner than later, but having that extra 50% of HP restored guarantees that you'll be able to take just a little bit more damage and beating, especially if your healer is kind of busy trying to tend to the rest of the team in a particularly intense fight. Reduce on the right arm is a brand new skill being introduced into the game by all intents and purposes, and basically explaining Reduce is that upon attacking the target, it reduces the number of counts on a target's symptoms by 2. Now, a symptom in this case is defined both by the positive buffs and negative ailments that are applied to the target in question. And normally, buffs or ailments like to apply by a certain number of ticks before they expire on their own. Reduce basically attacks that directly. So let's say, for instance, if you have a positive buff that applies for 16 counts or 16 ticks, Reduce will knock that down to 14 immediately, making it a whole lot faster for it to expire or even wear off before it has to be reapplied. That also applies to negative ailments, which, would you look at that, as a left arm, it has Countdown. Countdown is a particularly nasty negative ailment that, upon attacking the target, inflicts a timer starting at 4. That means if you manage to successfully attack the target 3 more times, knocking that countdown timer down 1 tick per hit, when that timer hits 0, it's good night. Doesn't matter how healthy the target is or how unscratched the target is, if that timer hits 0, it is an instant shutdown of the bot in question, making it extremely easy and safe to take out a lot of particularly dangerous or very bulky targets if you really don't have the time or the resources for a long, drawn-out fight. The only real thing to pay attention to is, because Countdown is considered a negative ailment, it does mean that it can be removed or negated by anyone that uses Stat Cleanse or has it as a skill, so a little bit of caution there is advised. Biped legs means that he'll have very solid coverage across most terrains, and the leg ability of Unshakable only ties to his rather impressive bulk with what he brings to the table. With a head armor of 3299, almost 3300, arms at over 57,500 apiece, and legs at just shy of 6k, King Landio is absolutely packing the bulk. And that's not where he's stopping either, folks. With a base mobility of 844, he's off to a fairly solid start in the speed department, but an evade of 539 means that he's definitely not planning to dodge or graze anytime soon. But given the heavy armor and the bulk, I kind of think that's the least of his concerns anyway. But he is packing an impressive 1844 for his melee resist and a 1275 for his shoot resist, which means he can definitely take a hit and keep on kicking between whether it's up close and personal or from the enemy sniper taking pot shots at him. It's going to be rather difficult taking this bulky boy down to, and cutting him down to size, whether he's in one form or the other. And on the topic of alternative forms, King Landio, much like the original Gan King, can also meta change into a full wall type design, exchanging a suit of armor for a proper bastion or wall kind of format here, and exchanging his kit out entirely for a Zettai guard, force trap, charge plant, float legs, and the leg ability of Pupa, which reduces damage taken upon meeting a certain Metaforce threshold. Now, one of the big charms to Gan King was the fact that he had a lot of charge support in his kit, but also had perfect guard on there. So with the right build, you could use it potentially indefinitely as a free shield. But Zettai guard honestly takes a lot of what held Gan King back in change mode and kind of throws it out the window. Zettai guard is a defense skill which translates into absolute guard, in contrast to perfect guard, which basically negates everything, no ifs, ands, or buts. Zettai guard will negate instead any negative ailments of any or negative symptoms of any kind, as long on top of any damage modifiers. So this includes, say, damage buffs to Ghost or Beam or Hyper Beam from Charge Reliance, any max shot with its particular damage bonus, laser, beam, gunpowder, success, anything of the like that's a damage modifier, or any negative ailments of any kind is negated at zero defense or modifier. And Zettai guard will only take the base amount of damage at the end of the calculation. So this means if you're trying to use a fully charged ghost shot with defense ignore, well, guess what? You're not getting your defense ignore and you're not getting your damage plus relative to CG. So you're going to be basically love tapping this absolute wall of a unit anytime that he's on the center line protecting his allies. And since he is a meta change type model, he also is immune to destroy users that try to catch him off guard with Zettai guard. So something else especially to keep in mind. Force Trap is another brand new skill being introduced into the game, and simply explained, it is a passive-aggressive plant that when placed on the field will eat a small amount of charge from the enemy's charge gauge whenever they complete a heating phase and reach the command line. This will be a very great way to deter any particularly notable and dangerous CG sustained nukers, such as, again, Ghost, Full Charge, Metaforce spammers, Ghost Shot, or anything else of the like. This is going to be a very good way to cut them down and even prevent them from being able to use certain skills immediately, because it'll eat the charge before they have a chance to actually pull from or check from it. And Charge Plant is a passive plant that when placed on the field will boost the amount of charge active when an ally charges Metaforce by about 10% or so. So this will be very solid for any charge sustained allies on King Landio's side of the field while active. Changing to float also means that King Landio will basically negate all of his terrain incompatibilities as biped in exchange for A rank across the board. And in this form, he doesn't really change a lot of his stats, being completely honest. His mobility will go up just a little bit from mid 800s to mid 900s at 941. His evade really doesn't go anywhere, but his melee and his shoot resist will both equalize at 2139. And a very healthy HP bulk of over almost 21,000 HP means it's going to be extremely difficult cutting this guy down to size. And that's not even touching on Pupa, which upon achieving a certain Metaforce threshold, gives him an additional damage reduction on top of anything else that he's bringing to the table. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I very easily have to rate King Landio a very solid 8.5 out of 10, and that is me being particularly critical of him. He does have a lot of very solid things going for him, whether you use him as a solid shield with Metachain Zettai Guard, which, might I also point out here, does not require CG to use, so you can use it basically indefinitely. You can also use Super First Aid or even Countdown and Reduce fairly consistently as well with very good performance. So you can use King Landio anywhere pretty solidly no matter how you choose to use it. As mixed parts, though, I do have to rate him just a little bit lower at a 7.5 out of 10. Primarily on the grounds that if you do choose to mix his parts up, you will be missing out on Force Trap and Zettai Guard specifically. Given that Charge Plant and Pupa, it really isn't anything new that you'd be missing out on, and still using his mixed parts as a solid kit is also nice as well, with Super First Aid and Countdown also fairly good, but Reduce will also be fairly solid as well for anyone that tries to make use of Countdown spam just a little more consistently and with much easier performance.